Hi, I'm a fat little Asian man, and this is the Philippines. Due to the rule of Pinoy, now that I have just said the word Philippines, this video's comment section will now be full of Philippines mentioned raw or proud to be Pinoy. Just click on any other video about the Philippines and yeah, they'll be there. Obviously, it's clear that Filipinos are very proud of their culture, as they should be of course. But next to comments full of the Filipino flag, you can see comments like this, all talking about how Filipino racism is number one. This is what confuses me. How do Filipinos have the most pride and love for their country, but also seem to be the most racist to their own people? I mean, it's natural for people to have a love-hate relationship with their own country, but for Filipinos, there doesn't seem to be any middle ground. It's either 100% Pinoy pride in all caps, or living here is hell, I want to be reborn. This confusing nature made me want to make sense of Filipino racism even more, to try and understand the racism I was introduced by my own viewers. Something only possible by understanding the geography, culture, and history to see why Filipino racism is on a next level. Now, one thing before we begin, I'm not Filipino, I'm Korean, which means I am definitely not an expert. I started from my curiosity alone. This video was only possible because of my Filipino friends at university who helped me guide through the lore of the Philippines. So please comment for any corrections or things I missed out. Thanks. Because of all the Filipino presence online, it's easy to think the Philippines is one country with just one homogeneous people. But there's actually like 200 ethnic groups and different languages, spanning across 7,000 islands and a 113 million population. That's why the country is actually more like different online game servers. But we're going to go over the three major ones today: Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao. Luzon is the GDA server. Everything from knife-wielding tondos to quiet-speaking Ilocans are here, but it's most notable for the Metro Manila region, the largest city area in the country. A total of 52 million people live in Luzon, with 13 million in Metro Manila alone. The Manileños are basically the main characters of Filipino racism. Maybe it's because all the people are crammed together in the bad traffic, cooking under the Filipino sun, they are exceptionally skilled at being racist to everyone. Manileños are often stereotyped, by themselves mostly, that they are modern, sophisticated city people, with rich English-speaking coños sipping matcha lattes. They call the rest of the country province people, making fun of rural areas and other Filipinos that have distinct accents. Their biggest rivals are the Cebuanos in the Visayas region, aka the Stardew Valley server. Visayas is famous for its beautiful beaches and scenery, with their cozy inland farms. Obviously contrasting with the big city areas of Manila, the Cebuanos are known for being loud, fun-loving, and chill, which is why they laugh at Manileños for being busy, boring, and arrogant. Cebuanos hate it when a Tagalog corrects their grammar or roast them for not ever being in a mall before. Outside from the main drama, you've got Ilocanos in North Luzon who get bullied for speaking quietly and being really stingy, but are too busy working to really care. There's also the Warais, who even the Manileños don't bother, as they're known for being tough, probably from enduring all those typhoons. Because of Manileños looking down on provinces, naturally you would think it's Luzon versus Visayas and Mindanao. However, Mindanao is busy fighting their own battles. Literally, Mindanao is the Call of Duty server. In a country where over 90% are Christians, there's a unique Muslim population in Mindanao. For a few decades, there were armed separatist groups like MILF that got heavy media attention, and it was quite dangerous. Even though the region is decently safe now, that image of guns firing and bombs exploding was stuck, and everyone knows Mindanao as an FPS free-for-all. Now, if this was all Filipino racism had to offer, it wouldn't be Filipino racism, it would be Filipino regional quarrels. But the reason why it's racism is because your worth is calculated based on where you're from and especially your skin color. A lot of Filipinos grow up in a culture where having lighter skin color is treated as beautiful, wealthy, and desirable. My Filipino friends told me they grew up with their grandparents telling them, "You got whiter," or mestizo, like compliments, but were scolded if they were playing in the sun or left home without any sunscreen. It's why the skin whitening industry in the Philippines is massive. Products like whitening soaps, skincare, injections, pills, and treatments are very accessible, with one of the highest rates of skin lightener used in Asia. It's to the extent where people put mercury on their skin. It's also really evident by how the more darker skinned Filipinos are viewed as wild, exotic jungle dwellers. It's because darker people are more likely to be from the multiple indigenous communities like the Cordillera people. Apparently, there's a lot of tourists that treat them like they're cavemen from Night at the Museum. Now, I hear some of you furiously typing, "That's because white skin is associated with nobility as they didn't work in the sun. Don't you know that?" And yes, it is true, but it's not nearly as close to explaining the full picture. In the Philippines, especially in schools, you can hear the N-word more than an episode of the Boondocks. Why in a country with a presumed 0.5% black population uses the N-word so much? It's because the N-word's origin, negro, is still used to describe the darker skinned population. The word negrito means small black person in Spanish, and was made by the Spanish to categorize groups like the Eta, Ati, or Acta people. They also renamed an entire island to Negros Island because the Ata people living there were apparently too black. The term negrito is still used today to categorize all these people. From an outsider's perspective, it kind of seems insane that negrito is still used, because imagine if black people were still called that in US or Europe. Of course, Filipinos didn't make this label themselves. And to understand where this all comes from, we have to explain a crucial part of the Filipino identity and history: the colonial mentality. Colonial mentality is the internalized PTSD you get from being colonized. Every single country that has been colonized has colonial mentality, in some shape or form, depending on how long or severely you were colonized. For the Philippines, colonial mentality forms as an internal idea that European or white is superior compared to something local. It's not something that Filipinos do because they hate their country, it's just trauma left over. The colonizers might be long dead and gone, but their impacts on society still exists. In South Korea, the Japanese colonized us for like 35 years, which doesn't seem that long, but impacts are still here in everyday life. Did I forget to mention that Filipinos have been colonized for 380 years? To put this into perspective, Japan's Edo period, the most impactful and important period for building Japan's culture and history, is only 260 years. Just imagine what 380 years of colonization does to a country. Hell, even the name Philippines comes from the Spanish colonial era, named after King Felipe II. The Spanish colonized the Philippines for around 330 years, changing the local culture into a social caste system based on blood purity, like they did in all their colonies. Basically, the whiter you are, the higher you are. Spaniards at the top, mestizos second, indios or inland Filipinos next, and negritos at the very end. It's the colonizer classic: white equals cultured and black equals uncivilized. When the Americans took over for another 50 years after kicking the Spanish out, it was roughly the same thing. One thing though, the gap between urban and rural was intensified, especially through education programs that prioritized English-speaking mestizos while more darker rural areas received labor training. So for generations, if you wanted to move up the ranks, the only choice was to become more white, by appearance, by language, and by behavior. Mestizos got their status by doing just that, while most Filipinos were cemented as laborers and negritos were excluded entirely. Of course, this also means that mingling with negritos was social death, as they were depicted as savages. You can kind of see that the colonial mentality isn't a personal preference, it was the rules that dictated how you survive for generations. So, even though there's no colonial level segregation today, that idea of being white equals success and dark equals lesser is still here. It's why expensive private schools teach Shakespeare instead of Filipino literature, why beauty standards are dominated by being whiter compared to moreno, why owning American brands like Nike or Apple are a status symbol, even if they're made in Vietnam or China. So it sounds like all the ethnicities, regions, population, and the colonial history would make Filipino racism a huge problem, right? Well, yes and no. It has its own problems, but for the most part there are no serious ethnic conflicts, except for in Mindanao, like its other ASEAN siblings. It's the Filipino culture and identity that keeps the racism contained. Even with all the islands and ethnicities, almost everybody here shares a Filipino experience, like being baked in the sun and also blown away by typhoons, going into overcrowded schools with boring Araling Panilipunan classes but with delicious canteen food, corruption that makes millions disappear per month, but there's Jollibee. So yeah, pretty painful but kinda pleasant too. It's also the culture, which centers around family and community values, shared memory and heritage. It's why Filipinos are chronically online and texting, not just to goon, but also because they value being connected to others. the internet actually helps to unite all the people isolated by the sea. This is why, even though there's so many different groups like Bicols eating chilies or Pangasinans drinking hot coffee at 50 degrees, everyone still shares the identity that they are Filipino, like having a 4-month Christmas season. It's why racism has a sort of family vibe, as in Filipinos can bully each other, but outsiders should not dare to do so. However, this casual approach to racism is also why it's a problem. The idea that racism is more about tough love and jokes becomes a problem when people address real issues going on today. There is still actual real discrimination against the darker, indigenous, and Muslim groups within the country, but calling it out is framed as introducing divisive Western politics. Speaking of politics, Filipino politics is definitely one of the politics of all time, because Filipino elections are basically choosing from either corruption with corruption on the side, or corruption with extra corruption toppings. The result of most policies don't turn out so great. Of course, as with all politicians, they will refuse to take responsibility and look to shift blame on other people. When you have so much in common, the differences stand out even more, making it easier for people to blame other regions instead of the corruption. Politics and racism together is a recipe for disaster, and if left unchecked, it could be very divisive. However, there is a bigger push from Filipinos frustrated by what they feel as wasted potential from their country, trying to end corruption and fighting against the colonial mentality and racism. As a lot of Asia is pushing for less corruption and actual change in their countries, let's hope that the Philippines can reach full potential instead of wasted potential. So yeah, that's Filipino racism. Again, I'm not Filipino, so I've had some help from my Filipino friends, but they've also told me that they're coños themselves and probably cannot give me the full picture. So please tell me what I've missed in the comments, I'm pretty curious too. Also, if you've enjoyed this video, please subscribe. I make these videos all by myself and I don't use AI, which you can probably tell from how my video looks and sounds different from AI channels. So it would be a big help if you subscribe. Thank you so much for watching. Here's some other content that you may like.